I get the point that policymakers have not done enough to address the demand side of the equation, but part of the problem is the oversupply and the bad debt piling up in the property market. And to that extent, if the oversupply situation is addressed in some shape or form, then doesn't that kind of bring about rebalancing in the economy? So yes, demand doesn't go up, but the oversupply situation kind of comes down a bit.
Well, yes and no. And the no bit is because if you rebalance the economy by, completing all these houses, which are not completed, which is what we are talking about, and then encouraging people to move into them, you've done one thing. But how do you get the people to move, to buy them? And the point I'm making is that the fundamental imbalance in the housing market, and indeed throughout the Chinese economy, is an imbalance between supply and demand. Sure, you can pour money into the supply side, but you've still got houses to sell. Now, who's going to buy them? And the answer is, unfortunately, with a shrinking cohort of the population in the age bracket that actually buys houses, and with that cohort of the population not feeling particularly confident about its future, the answer is they're not going to buy them.
Right. Do you think China is really fighting hard to ensure, David, that it doesn't get into a debt deflation spiral if it already hasn't gotten to that point?
I think it's fighting hard, but I think it's mainly fighting in the wrong direction. For example, its focus is on supply. It doesn't matter where you look in all the stimulus measures, but very little about the consumer. The consumer is underrepresented in the Chinese economy by probably 20%. It's the major future of China. If you take the capital injections that are going on, well, they may stop financial collapse if you do a debt swap with local governments, and it may help banks to stabilize their assets and liabilities, but it doesn't encourage more debt because you haven't really solved the problem, which is that the asset quality is poor. And then if you take, what you really need to do if you want to get the economy moving is to define the rights of the private sector, focus on the consumer, and circumscribe those of the state, and make that a matter of fundamental law in China. That would help the private sector. And I would say, finally, you've got to understand that local governments, right, you can swap their debts with central government debts and do all sorts of things, but that doesn't make the problem go away. What you really have to do is actually reform the fiscal the fiscal plans in China, the fiscal reality in China, so that local governments actually aren't dependent on the property market in order to finance themselves. So that complexity is not appreciated. I don't think it's comprehended.